Institute for Economic Justice has published a scorecard on government's handling of the economy and poverty during the lockdown. It's revealed government's focus on strategies for recoveries, but it shows an inadequate implementation of special COVID-19 rescue measures, which undermine the health response. About 2 million people have lost their jobs, and the unemployment rate overall is said to now be around 43%. Government intervention will be required before companies will be prepared to employ people during this period of economic instability. Sonia Palazzi is an economist, and researcher with the Institute for Economic Justice. Sonia, very good evening to you. Great to have you on. So we'll get to the scorecard and your findings in a moment, but I want us to begin with your call after the State of the Nation address for more social protection and a basic income guarantee. How would that work with all the other competing interests currently?
Thanks, Temegile, and good evening to you and to your viewers. Temegile, yeah, the general undertone of the SONA address was one of quite a bit of optimism by the president. However, this actually does not reflect or mirror the reality of millions of South Africans who need more than promises, right? The reality is that we are actually in a state of emergency, and the tone of his address felt like it was more business as usual. And so, you know, the overwhelming feeling after hearing his address was a bit of disappointment because, you know, the framework that he uses is pretty much what it has been for years, and this has actually not worked and simply does not go far enough. So, you know, he spoke a lot about implementing a huge infrastructure rollout and a number of economic reforms, but this actually does not measure against severe fiscal consolidation over the next few years, which will actually see severe budget cuts in the medium term that will undermine these efforts. So, for example, you know, there was a lot of talk about infrastructure, but we've seen over the past couple of years, infrastructure has been one of the most underspent areas in the budgets. About 450 billion rand, if I'm not mistaken, was underspent by the government over the past 4 years alone. And so what we're actually calling for is that we need a government stimulus plan that looks to reviving the economy and looks to changing this approach to economic reforms. And yes, this includes a social protection. So, you know, while we welcome the extension of the grants, it's a little bit worrying, for example, that it took a lot of advocacy from social partners, from Labour, from civil society, to get it extended twice. And it's disappointing that we're still seeing, you know, reports of people, mostly women, struggle to receive their grants because of the inefficiencies of governments, particularly because this pandemic, as we've seen, has had the most impact on women and black women. And so it's disappointing that the caregiver grant was not renewed because, you know, it directly puts money in the hands of those struggling the most. And so, yeah, so we need a lot more reforms. We need a lot more. The government needs to do a lot more to. So sorry.
Oh, not a problem. I was just listening there to you. But let me come in here and ask you about the issue of the grant before we get to the scorecard again. You're not only calling for the social distress grant to be made a permanent thing or permanent instrument, but you also want it raised to about 585, which is what? Just above, I think, the poverty line, as it were, in South Africa. How would we fund it?
So, Temegile, the reality is that the government has not fully realized all of the fiscal and monetary policy tools available at hand. And so our argument, for example, is a wealth tax, which, you know, Treasury is reluctant to even engage with. Something like that would actually, there's been enough research from civil society, from academics, that shows that a wealth tax would be able to fund something of that magnitude. So the issue actually for us isn't about financing, but a fundamental shift in the framework and how we actually approach the economy.
Very briefly, in about, 30 seconds, if you can, the scorecard then. How was that in line or not with what the president presented this week?
So, yeah, the reality is that many of the promises of the 500 billion rescue package severely fell through the cracks, right? The overall package, for example, was not actually an additional 500 billion to the budget. So it wasn't actually a stimulus. You know, while Treasury claimed it was a 500 billion stimulus injection into economy, there was only about a net increase to non-interest spending in the budget of just about 36 billion. And the rest was actually shifted from other kind of important areas of the budget, primarily social spending. funding, right? And our IEJ researchers have actually found that actually of the 500 billion that was promised, our analysis shows that only about a third of that package has effectively materialized. And so the real question is where the other 2/3 is, and when will we see an immediate stimulus injection into the economy of the magnitude that this moment deserves.
All right. Sonia Paladzi, economist and researcher with the Institute for Economic Justice. Good to speak to you.